Okay, good morning, everybody. My name is Gene Coltes. I'm presiding member for the Metropolitan Outer Development Assessment Panel meeting today. Firstly, I'd like to open the meeting and acknowledge the traditional owners and pay respect to elders past and present of the land on which the meeting is being held. Item 2 on our agenda is apologies. I have had none. Item 3 on the agenda is members on leave of absence. There aren't any. Item 4 on the agenda, we note the minutes of previous meetings. They're on the Development Assessment Panel website. Part B on our agenda is the running sheet for the two applications that we're going to be assessing today, and item 1 on the agenda is to confirm that all panel members have duly considered all the documentation within part B of the agenda and also the additional information that has been provided since the agenda went out here. All okay, thank you. Item 2, I'll invite members to declare any interest that they have noted.
Presiding member, I would like to declare in accordance with section 2.410 of DAP Code of Conduct 27 that I, Karen Hyde, participated in a state administrative tribunal process in relation to the application at 5.1 lot 622 Aurora Boulevard, Golden Bay. I acknowledge that I'm not bound by any confidential discussions that occurred as part of the mediation process and undertake to exercise independent judgment in relation to the DAP application before us today and consider it on its planning merits.
Thank you, Karen. There are 2 other declarations of interest that are they on the agenda from Councillors Buchan and Jones?
Yeah, they should be.
Okay. We'll note that they're there and you're able to participate in the meeting. Item 3.1 on our agenda is the development application for childcare premises at numbers 4 and 6 Malibu Road, Safety Bay. In the running sheet that I have here, we have presenters for the items. We have several written submissions from Anne Brennan, various members of the community, Dion Alston, Hazel Ecker, Judy Malley, Kath Ennis, Peggy Ann Wilson, and Pierina Miragliotta. So they are all written submissions. They are on our agenda as additional information, and all panel members have declared that they are familiar with all of those, and we will give them due consideration. The next presenter on the agenda is Mr. John Hurley from EAQ Consulting. Mr. Hurley, would you like to make your presentation, please? You have 3 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you all. I'm sorry, I'm having a slight, apologise, I'm having a very slight issue with my screen.
We can see you.
Can you? Yes.
And we can hear you clearly.
Well, that's important.
Essential.
I'm terribly sorry about this. Okay, so
now,
you can't hear?
can you hear us?
Yes, I can. Yes. Yep.
We can't hear you now. You've done something.
I'm unmuted. You still can't hear me?
Still can't hear you.
I do apologise. I can't. Yes,
John, can you hear us? Because we can hear you.
His end.
yes.
Maybe it's on the DAP secretariat end. Because we can hear John clearly and see him.
We can't hear him from here. Is he on mute?
Presiding member, can you hear us?
Yes, we can.
Because we can hear John clearly and see him clearly. I'm not sure if it's maybe he's just muted from your end because we can hear him and everything.
Well, we could hear him earlier, but we can't now.
I haven't actually touched anything that would turn anything off, gentlemen and ladies. I apologise.
We can hear
We
you
can hear
now.
now.
John,
Okay.
would you like to make your presentation? Use you.
So as you know, EAQ has undertaken some work in following this this determination for Greener 4 Propriety Limited, the client, Malibu Road, the subject site. We were engaged to undertake the impact assessment of the adjacent service station to the proposed childcare centre, and the purpose is to support the development application. We understand the application has been considered by the City of Rockingham, the planning officers. The city has engaged an independent environmental consultant, an SLR consulting, to peer review our emissions impact assessment. And subsequent to that, the city's planning staff have recommended approval subject to conditions. Regardless of the officer's recommendations and the advice from SLR, the council has recommended refusal. We're not in support of the refusal contained in the RAR. We request that the Metro Outer Joint Development Assessment Panel approve the application based on the city's officer's recommendations. As noted in page 15 of the RAR, the city being engaging SLR Consulting to undertake a peer review. The peer review considered the appropriateness of the assessment methodology, its context within regard to WA legislation and guidelines, and whether the emission assessment indicated that the National Environmental Protection Measure, which is NEPM, whether their air quality criteria are likely to be met at the proposed childcare centre based on everyday activities at the existing BP service station. It's important to understand that the operational hours of the childcare centre are less than the operational hours of the service station, and those hours of operation for the childcare centre fall within daytime hours where the risk of ground level emissions impacts are considerably lower than outside of those timeframes. It's also good to note that the childcare centre is running for 5 days as opposed to the service station having the potential to run for 7 days and also 24-hour access. Our peer review has concluded that the assessment was found to be, the peer review has concluded that the assessment was found to be appropriate for its intended purpose, but it would benefit from addressing some additional issues of which we have since undertaken. Those issues for the purposes of a scientific assessment have had no bearing on the outcome with regard to anything material. The site and its exposure with respect to, as in the BP site, and its emissions and the potential exposure to the childcare centre are sufficiently not impacted by any large-scale weather impacts or otherwise. So the peer review suggestions, whilst we undertook them and represented them to SLR, they have no material bearing on the outcome. As a result, the city's officers recommend approval, subject to conditions based on that conditions of independent advice from the SLR consultant. We support the methodology of measuring the separation distance. The separation distance should be taken from the nearest emission source to the nearest sensitive receptor boundary, not from the boundary of the emission source. So in this case, it is the ventilation tubes, the ventilation pipework, and or the Bowser itself at the BP service station. That's how it should be measured. That's how it's measured with regard to the Department of Water and Environmental Regulation. Emissions monitoring is not necessary as a potential condition. It's fraught with error. It is very difficult to undertake, and we've already demonstrated that there will be no emissions impacts at the childcare centre. And most importantly, the emissions to the childcare centre from the BP service station will occur in daytime hours, where the incident of vertical mixing, dispersion, and ultimately a breakup of any emissions plume is highly likely compared to outside of those hours. So the risk is very low in our view. And the science supports that. So does the SLR peer review as well. And based on the above, we support the proposed development. We're of the view it should be approved, and it's been demonstrated scientifically and otherwise to include peer reviewers' comments and suggestions that the emissions impacts will not have a detrimental impact on the childcare centre. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hurley. I'll open up for questions at this stage because of the technical nature of it. Councillor Jones.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Hurley. Can you just confirm two things? So one, in regard to doing your assessment, there wasn't actually any monitoring at the site. It was just based on modelling. Is that correct?
That's correct, yes.
And the other question relates to the vapour recovery systems at the service station. Is that just got the VR1, not the VR2? Is that correct?
Yeah, that is the assumption we've made. Yes, absolutely. That's the assumption we've made, and that's how the assessment was undertaken on that basis.
Okay. All right. Thank you. No more questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further questions of Mr. Hurley? If not, Mr. Stewart, would you like to make your presentation, please? Remember, you have 3 minutes.
Thank you, presiding member. Good morning, everyone. My name is Nathan Stewart from Row Group. With me today is my colleague, Sam Bowers, representative of the landowner, Bo Ziong, Malik Vadat from Carmel Group, John Hurley from EAQ Consulting, and Tim Reynolds from Herring Store. Acoustics should be dialed in as well. We're available to answer any of your questions following the presentation. This proposal was last considered by the JDAP in September of last year. Since then, we've investigated flipping the design of the development. The result of this is a much better outcome overall, with the car park in the southwest corner and play space in the southeast between the building and the street in the northeast area. Doing so has moved the children playing away from the outdoor living areas of adjoining properties. The property to the northeast is up against the boundary is a driveway and vehicle parking area, not outdoor living. Also, this proposal is a much smaller childcare centre than what is normally considered elsewhere. There's only a maximum of 60 children. Normal, larger size centres are typically 80 to 120 size centres. So this is much smaller than most. I just wanted to address a lot of the comments that came through the written submissions from neighbours that were published yesterday. In relation to noise management, Tim Reynolds should be in attendance today and able to respond to any queries. The noise modelling has been based on 60 children playing outside at any given time, so as to produce a worst case scenario in the noise modelling. This is standard practice for this type of development. In reality, the number of children playing outdoors at any given time will be less than that. The acoustic report demonstrates compliance with the relevant assigned noise levels at all times. Therefore, there should be no restrictions imposed in terms of noise management other than what is proposed in the acoustic report itself. Some of the recommendations from the acoustic report include a 2.1 metre high colour-bond fence to the northeast boundary and restricting the use of the car parking bay, some of the parking bays before 7 a.m. The 2.1 metre high fence is not an adverse impact on the adjoining property. Additionally, the parking restrictions can easily be managed by the centre management. In relation to the boundary wall in the northwest corner of the site, under clause 5.1.3 of the R codes, boundary walls may be built up in areas coded R20, where they're no higher than 3.5 metres and up to a maximum of 9 metres or 1/3 the length of the boundary. Whilst the original proposal did not comply with this requirement, we've updated the plans to make it compliant. If this proposed development was a single dwelling, approval wouldn't even be required for that boundary wall because it would satisfy the deemed to comply requirement. In relation to the 50 metre buffer that John has mentioned, you've obviously received a written submission and heard from John this morning. We're all available to answer any questions on this matter, but looking at the report, the city's own independent peer review and the city's recommendation, there is consensus that the assessment undertaken can be relied upon by the city, and the city's officers have recommended approval notwithstanding the refusal recommendation that's come through from council. In relation to the discretionary use and the location of the childcare centre, the proposed childcare premises use is capable of approval within the residential zone. The suggestion that the proposed development is unplanned and unanticipated does not account for the fact that the use is discretionary within the residential zone, and the council does have the ability to approve this type of use following a process of advertising. The location of the proposed use opposite a site intended for non-residential development is appropriate, and through our planning submission, the undersupply of childcare services in this locality has been highlighted. And just in relation to traffic, the proposal is supported. The city's officers support the conclusions of the TIS. The TIS has made some conclusions that the proposal will generate about 245 trips per day, with 47 trips in the AM and PM periods. This is a low to moderate traffic volume and can be accommodated within the existing capacity of the surrounding road network. The proposed access arrangements comply with the required sight lines. The proposal complies with the minimum parking requirements of the scheme. The parking layout complies with the Australian standards. The existing footpath is considered adequate for the movement of pedestrians and vehicles. And Shawmac has reviewed the crash history data and determined that the data does not indicate any safety issues. So on the basis of all that information and in the information in our submission, we ask that the JDAP please resolve to approve this development in accordance with the city's officers' recommendation that's contained at the back of the RAR, and not refuse it in line with the responsible authority recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Stewart. Panel members, any questions of Mr. Stewart? Yes, councillor.
Thank you. I would just like to seek some clarification about the noise mitigation from the boundary walls and fences. Just to clarify, the rear boundary wall to the rear of the block, is going to be 3.34 metres in height as opposed to 3.5 metres in the original application. So you brought that down by 16 centimetres to comply with the residential design codes. You've also got on the back wall, on the back boundary, the wall of the building, which is 4.5 metres in height. Is that correct?
It's not 4.5 metres on the boundary, it's approximately 3.3 metres in height on the boundary.
That's the wall, that's not the building. The building on the back boundary is listed as 4.5 metres.
Yes, but that's set back from, that portion of the building is set back from the boundary approximately 2.7 metres.
Can you perhaps show me on a diagram, please, because it looks like the building is on the boundary.
Do you have the sorry, I'm just loading the RAR now. I'll bring up the attachment, just 1 second.
It's right on the boundary.
Okay, can you see this on the screen now?
Yes.
Yes.
Sorry, I'm just grabbing the keyboard.
So am I right in thinking that the building is on the boundary?
The building is on the boundary. Sorry, I'm just trying to find the zoom in button. Just 1 sec.
The bottom left, bottom right.
Oh, there it is.
Yeah.
So you can see here, this is the boundary wall, and it's 3.34 metres in height. Then it steps up to 4.5 metres, I think, where it's here, and that's set back 2.7 metres from the boundary. So it's the, I think it's the gable of the roof.
The wall extends across the entire back length of that.
Not the entire back length of the boundary, no. So that boundary wall is here. So that hatched area, that's the boundary wall.
And the rest is colour bond.
The rest is colour bond, yes.
And the colour bond extends to the two edges of the property.
Yes. So there'll be colour bond on this side, on the left, and then on the right from here where the cursor is to the other boundary.
Okay, does that
Yeah, thank you.
answer your question?
And was there a question around noise mitigation or something, or with the slight reduction of the height of the wall? Because we've got Tim Reynolds online if you want to hear from him at all.
Thank you.
No, that was fine. Councillor
Okay.
Jones, you've got a question.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so just 3 points actually. So it's good that the owners are there as well. So first, in regard to the need for a childcare centre, I didn't see any information on that, but are they aware there's also a childcare centre proposed across the road on commercial zone land?
Yes, we are aware of that one. So we looked at the demand for childcare centre places within the catchment, and there was sufficient demand with it to cater for both centres.
Okay, thank you very much for that one. The other one you quoted just regarding regarding location, but the distance to the local shop, which is down the other end of Malibu Road, I wouldn't call that close. I think it's about 1.5 kilometres. Is that a factor that you consider normally with the location of childcare centres as well?
I would say this site's probably more appropriate given what's immediately opposite on the other side of Malibu Road. It's just that there is other non-residential development around the area as well. I mean, 1.5 kilometres away really isn't that far, but it's still, it's a factor, but it's not a significant factor as what's opposite the site or what will be opposite the site eventually.
Okay, thank you for that. And my last one, just in relation to noise and fencing. So I understand that colour bond fencing would make the design technically compliant. I just have some issues like with children playing outside and there being a colour bond fence. Is there a nuisance if the children were to hit the fence or a ball hit against it? Is that taken into account at all in those noise monitoring?
Tim, do you want to respond to that?
Yeah, the colour bond fence is for acting as a barrier, and as part of the management plan, they will manage so people don't bang on the fence. But you're quite right. If a kid goes up and bangs on a colour bond fence, it'll make that clattering noise. But in these modern childcare centres, that's a very rare thing to occur.
Thank you. So I understand the applications recommend for refusal at this point, but if it was approved, would the owners and proponents be willing to perhaps look at a masonry fence to stop that sort of nuisance? Like, just speaking to the owners in the area, they feel like the colour bond wouldn't be sufficient. So would the applicant be willing to perhaps put a masonry fence around the property or wall?
I understand the to the northeast, that's where the babies are. So that wouldn't be they wouldn't obviously be throwing balls into the northeast to the neighbour. That's their driveway and thing. So the noise, if it did bang, wouldn't be as annoying as if it was an outdoor living area.
Sure.
So I think that should be taken into consideration as well.
Just speaking to the nearby residents, they feel like if it was to be approved, a masonry wall would be a better solution. So it's really just getting some feedback from the owners.
Yeah, sorry, I was just talking to the owners then. We would consider doing a masonry wall along the northeast boundary, so the boundary without the boundary wall, because the babies are located in that the northern corner. So the northwest boundary, if we did a masonry wall to that side, would be agreeable to that.
And the rest of the fencing, like a lot of it's just fibro cement, so it would actually be replaced with colour bond for the remaining of the property, is that right?
That's right, yes.
Anyway, but I do appreciate, yeah, the willingness to, if it was approved, to replace that colour bond on the northeastern boundary. So thank you very much for that.
Okay, thank you. Karen, you have a question? Go
Thank
ahead.
you. Yes, the location of the bin store, which is up against the boundary, is there any potential to reconsider that? Just conscious of, you know, potential odour and those sorts of things, or bin lids closing all the time?
Really, the only other place to put the bin store, we did look at that, and really it'd be putting it in front of the building, which isn't a great appearance. The bin store would include like a drain and hose cock and everything, and it would be cleaned and kept tidy, so that there shouldn't be any form of odour or rodents or anything like that within the bin store area. So aesthetically, it's better to have it at the back, but there is a management plan in place to make sure that it is cleaned.
Sorry, I sort of missed the last bit. We've got a bit of noise interference here. Perhaps we could have the sound up just a little in the room. Could you just repeat that last response?
Yeah, so aesthetically, we think that having the bin store at the back of the site is a better outcome. There's management plans in place to keep that bin store clean and tidy. There's facilities there to keep it clean and tidy, so the preference is to keep it at the back of the site, and we don't think odour or rodents or anything like that will be an issue.
Okay, thank you. And I have a second question. The landscape plan that we have in the package is pretty basic. There's been some focus for tree planting along the public street interface, but little consideration around the perimeter of the lot as it interfaces with the neighbours. Is it the assumption that the landscape plan and the detail that comes through on that would include some level of vegetation along the boundaries?
Yeah, so I was just talking to the owner then. We'll consider putting in some sort of trees along the front between the building and the street, and then also along the north east boundary along that wall. But we're happy to accept a detailed landscaping plan as a condition to be to the satisfaction of the city, and then we can work that out through the detail of that.
Okay, thank you very much. That was all from me, presiding member.
Thank you. I do have a question in regard to the bin store. It seems to be every application we seem to look at, the bin stores are hard up against a neighbouring property, and we always get complaints or concerns raised by adjoining owners as to noise and odour. I notice at that point up against the bin store there's an 1800 rendered brick screen wall. Would the proponent look at raising that wall and perhaps putting a roof over the bin store to ameliorate any odours and noise coming from that? I think we're looking at about maybe 4 or so metres length.
I was just talking.
Raising the height of that.
Maybe raise the height
there a bit.
Yeah, sorry, just talking with the owner. A roof, he considers a roof to probably enclose it too much in terms of odour. We'll consider increasing the height on the boundary to that 1800 high boundary wall, the masonry wall on that section, maybe raising it to 2.1. But yeah, a roof on it would probably add a little bit too much of an enclosure to it to keep things in.
We have seen previously that proponents have put a roof over it with a whirling extractor fan of some sort, just a mechanical, not electric operator or anything, and that seemed to make the adjoining owner a little bit happier. Is there some way?
Okay. Maybe if we did one or the other in terms of putting a colour bond roof over it with some sort of whirly bird on it, and not raise the height, or just raise the height without a roof on it. I think that would be our preference.
Sorry, you said you'd roof it with
Roof it with,
on it.
yes, but not increase the height of the boundary wall.
Kind of defeats the purpose a bit.
Pretty low. I
Yeah.
didn't have
I mean, you wouldn't have much headspace in there if you put a roof over it, and if you didn't raise the roof.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. Look, we'll accept doing both of those.
Okay, perhaps we could discuss that a bit further amongst ourselves to see how that can happen.
We could ask the local government
Yes, yeah.
councils.
Okay, thank you. Are there any other questions of the presenters? If not, do panel members wish to ask any questions of the council staff on the items raised?
Did you want to just maybe mention the bin store? Do you have any other advice on that or comment?
Did you go over there?
Oh, do you need to move? Okay,
Be on the mic.
you'll have to take the oath, won't you?
Please make it up. I was gonna see if it was gonna work.
Thanks very much, folks. Mike Ross, City of Rockingham. Look, I mean, from the city's viewpoint, I think it's important that the wall height is as low as it can be along that residential interface. So that was one of the concerns that we'd raised initially through council. The applicants amended the design so that the boundary wall height is within compliance of the R codes. If you start raising walls significantly, then it starts to trigger a reassessment under the R code. So it's already compliant. With respect to odour, I guess it's a matter for the city's health services to liaise with the operator to make sure that there is no ongoing odour issue. And that can be managed by the operator in relation to the frequency of the bin collections, how waste is stored before it's actually perhaps put into the receptacles for collections. So look, putting a roof on it, we're neither here nor there in relation to that. If that's what the JDAP decides, then that's fine, along with the whirlybird, but our preference is to keep the wall height low on the boundary.
Just if you wouldn't mind just staying there, please, just as if I may,
Yep.
Yes,
just as follow-ups. A couple of aspects have emerged from the questioning of the applicant, which may have some knock-on effect to some of the conditions. Should, you know, that we've got a couple of options in the report, and just
Yeah.
sort of thinking rather than bringing you back at a later stage. Are you comfortable that the way that condition 15 is worded around the bin store location provides you with sufficient authority to consider those amenity issues? That would be the first question. And the second question is condition 19, which relates to landscape and the revised landscape plan. Would there be other wording that would be added to that? Because I know that the applicant is able to consider additional landscape to the northeast boundary, or would that be in the form of some sort of advice note? Keen to get your views on that, should the panel get to that point later in the meeting.
With respect to condition 15, we are satisfied with the way it is worded. Whilst it doesn't specifically refer to management of odour, these applications are always assessed internally by our city's health services. So once again, if for whatever reason there is an issue in relation to odour, our health services will respond appropriately and take the appropriate action if required. With respect to, so I'm not recommending any further changes to condition 15. I think it's more of a matter of operational management. With respect to the landscaping, I think there are a few good points that were raised in relation to providing further enhancements to the landscaping approach. But again, that could be something that can be dealt with through a landscaping plan. But would certainly support if the JDAP wanted to an extra line item for some additional landscaping along the northeastern boundary and to the residential properties along the car park.
Yes, and there was also the matter raised about the additional masonry fence, I think, along the northeastern boundary. Where would you see reference to that undertaking appearing?
There is a condition, I believe, in relation to compliance with the noise acoustic consultants report. So we just need to find that condition.
20.
Yeah.
Condition 20, I think.
Yeah, so fencing heights and types. So because the fencing heights and types are based on the hearing storer report, which refers to double panel colour-bond fencing at 2.1, we would have to adjust the condition to reflect, with the exception of the northeast boundary wall being 2.1 metre masonry construction.
Thanks very much. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you very much. Any further questions of?
Yeah.
Yes,
Yes,
but
please.
sorry.
Are we getting into a battle of the conditions here? Because is it the case that if we've got landscaping along that boundary, then the noise issues start to ameliorate pretty quickly?
I think aesthetically, landscaping is always going to be a supported solution. Look, it certainly mitigates the issue, I guess, of a ball hitting the wall. I think from our viewpoint, it's something that can be resolved in discussions with the applicant.
Okay.
Yep. No further questions?
Any further? No, thank you very much. Okay, well, that completes the presentations and questions of staff. We'll move on to the next item, and that is I'll call so that we can go into discussion on the item. I'll call for a mover and seconder for the item so we can discuss.
Happy to move, President.
Moved.
I'll second.
Councillor Jones, seconded Councillor Buchan. Councillor Jones, you may speak to the item, please.
Yeah, thank you. So thank you again to the applicant and owners for submitting it. We certainly forward development in Rockingham. But however, I felt in this instance that the site is not suitable. Our default position is really that the use is not permitted unless discretion is granted after advertising. And we've heard loud and clear from neighbouring property owners that there are a lot of elderly people in the area, and to them it's a use that they don't feel is compatible with their surrounding properties. A lot of them stay at home during the day. I think there's a shift worker as well. So they feel like that the amenity of the area will be dramatically impacted. The second point's regarding the health impacts from the neighbouring service station. Again, I don't feel that's been adequately addressed, or there's still some risks there, which I'm not prepared to I guess, support, especially with this case. It's not an application for the service station, it's actually an application for the childcare centre. So there's no vapour recovery systems, the VR2 coming from the Bowsers as well. So based on those points, I'm still recommending that the application be refused. I also note that there was an application in Margaret River last year which JDAP refused a childcare in a residential area for the similar sort of reasons. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Buchan.
Yeah, thank you. This has been before us now twice, and we've had quite considerable contact with the community in Safety Bay. The numbers of objections were 30 in September 2023, and this time around it was 11 out of 11. But from talking to people, a lot of people could not make a submission because they were elderly and they live in the immediate area around the proposed development. And also a lot of people believe that their objection would carry from one application to the next after it had been deferred. The objections were on the basis of the impact on their amenity and noise, and obviously the proximity to the service station. Reading through and looking at the responses from the Department of Health, they're quite clear that the separation is boundary to boundary, and in this case, the boundary to boundary is only 30 metres when the recommended guideline is 50 metres. So therefore, that guideline is not met by some considerable distance. There was no air monitoring performed, only modelling in the environmental assessment. And we've heard today about the assumption of a VR1. We don't know if there's a VR1 over that area where they're going to put the fuel into the ground, and we know there's no VR2s at those pumps. And as Councillor Jones has stated, we've got no ability to ask that service station to put VR1 and VR2 onto their pumps and refueling areas. I need to compare what we had before, which was a residential development. If people are buying in a new area and there's already a childcare, then they're aware of what they're buying into. This is a residential row of houses, and they really are telling us, the City of Rockingham, about the impacts it's going to have on their everyday lives. The residential houses are now going to be turned into commercial development, and those amenity impacts are quite huge for the adjoining owners. Under our planning policy, local government planning policy 3.3.5, I don't believe the childcare is considered compatible with the surrounding residential land uses. Across the road, we have a commercial development that is compatible, and I don't see why commercial development should encroach into a residential area and impact onto the lives of the people that are going to be most affected by that. That's the adjoining owners. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any other panel member wish to speak to the item or against?
I'm of a mind not to support the motion and to consider the officer's recommendation for approval. The application has been supported by quite considerable technical information on traffic impact, on emissions impact, on noise. The emissions impact has been peer reviewed and regarded to be appropriate. I think in response to previous concerns of the panel, the application has been revised, reoriented, the layout adapted. Admittedly, it is a discretionary use in a residential area, but the zoning for residential is clear that other supporting facilities and services can be considered as compatible in a residential area. The architecture is of a domestic or residential nature, single story, and consideration of the city's local planning policy requirements suggests that childcare premises of this nature would be compatible. So at this point, I'm not in a position to support the motion before us.
Thank you. Yes, Mr. Syme.
Yes, look, I'm of a similar mind. It's not uncommon for us to get for childcare facilities before the event, not unreasonable concerns from surrounding residents, but this is a planning framework which does several things. First of all, it does allow this. It is a discretionary list, but it clearly anticipates a use like this. So it is a use which we can approve. And secondly, there are some not unreasonable concerns about odour and noise, but at some stage we need to go with the science, and we need to go with what informed and expert opinion is telling us. It's not the sort of thing that is useful or sensible for us to make up ourselves, especially when we've got expert advice in front of us. And I think in each of those matters, noise and particularly odour, we've got sufficient comfort for me to say that there is no risk or the risk is not one which is unacceptable. And I think that's made pretty clear in terms of odour, for example. There are now 2 quite comprehensive reports on that. And I think the science behind that is satisfactory. Secondly, the other issues that have to do with childcare, noise and so on, I think they've been satisfactorily addressed. In terms of architecture, this is a very modest development. It's actually quite small in terms of childcare centres. And I think the architecture fits in with the residential environment. I can't see any objective reason why we shouldn't approve this, so I won't be supporting this motion.
Thank you. I too won't be supporting the motion. I think the responsible authority report shows a comprehensive assessment. It's supportive. It provides cogent reasons for the decision. The RA is based on revised plans. The plans have been modified to take account of concerns raised regarding noise, odour, parking, traffic. So the peer review on the environmental assessment, I agree with Mr. Syme regarding the science behind the decisions that have been made on that and recommendations. In terms of the use of the site for a childcare centre, once again, there is discretion that we are being asked to exercise in the matter. The application has been submitted with a detailed assessment, suite of assessments in terms of traffic, parking, noise, fences, etc. And they've all come up with recommendations that have been supported through the council assessment officer or the council officer assessment process. The development is compatible in scale with the surrounding area, and I think there's a suite of management plans, including waste, stormwater, noise, that just go to reinforce the need to comply with those to reduce the impact on the amenity of the locality. So having said that, I'll pass back to the mover of the motion to exercise his right of reply.
Yeah, thank you, panel members. Yeah, so just in summary, I mean, generally in the city of Rockingham, we receive childcare premises in new residential areas. I think that Councillor Buchan mentioned we don't normally get submissions or objections at all because they're appropriately located, and then they're actually built prior to a lot of other residences come in. So in this instance, it's a lot different. It's an established residential area with a lot of elderly residents that live adjacent and nearby. And I guess that's where we've heard a lot of objections. And I think we need to take that into consideration. Their amenity, their lifestyle, how with noise and traffic and just a totally different land use next to them, they're not supportive. The other issue in regard to the health impacts on the children in the centre from the service station, I think we should take more of a precautionary principle. Often the science is behind the regulations, and we've been dealing with other applications as well, in regard to benzene impacts on children. So for me, I'm still not satisfied that this application for the use of a childcare centre is not in the right position. And yeah, hopefully the whole panel can support that, but I understand you guys see a lot of childcare premises applications probably in established areas, and yeah, so that's understand the other side of it as well. So thank you.
Thank you very much. I think we've had sufficient discussion on the matter, so I will put the item to the vote. All those in favour of the approval? Refusal, sorry. All those against? The motion is lost. And we can move on to an alternate recommendation in that regard. We have before us the officer recommendation in order that we can discuss that as an alternate motion. Can I have a mover and seconder for that, please?
I'm happy to move,
Karen,
presiding member. I might,
I'll second.
okay. We'll do
Seconded,
amending
Mr.
motion
Syme.
Put it in if you like.
Okay.
Karen, do you want to speak to the item?
Well,
and
no,
give-
no, hang on. We're
Just,
just going, we
might-
might actually do it as a,
Might I suggest that in moving this, that is inclusive of an amendment to condition 19 to add Roman numeral 7,
Mhm.
that landscape is to be provided to the northeastern boundary of the site. And in addition to condition 20, I would like to include in this motion that the sentence or the additional words with the exception of the northeast boundary wall being 2.1 metres masonry. So that would be the motion I'd like to put forward, please.
Okay, thank you.
yes, I'll second that.
You'll second that. So with the agreement of the mover and seconder, there's an amended alternate motion. Karen, do you wish to speak to it now, please?
Oh, just very briefly, I think the applicant has considered a number of the matters raised previously in reconfiguring the development. I think they've worked closely with the officers to ensure that impacts, if any, are reduced, mitigated. It's of a scale which is of a domestic design, the built form. It's a relatively modest development for 60 children. And I'm comfortable with the technical documentation which has supported the application, and having referred to the officers a few questions, I'm comfortable with the conditions of approval with those amendments in place. The development can be adequately and appropriately delivered to the satisfaction of the city. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Karen. Mr. Syme?
Yes, look, I won't repeat at length what I said before. I think that this version of the proposal clearly has benefited from having some sort of reworking, and it is now, I think, at the level of detail has been worked up to something which is quite satisfactory. And clearly is better than the previous version of it. So it benefited from that time, and I think it's satisfactorily addressed all of the issues, and I think it's capable of approval.
Thank you. I'll speak to the item as well, although perhaps the opponents may wish to have a say. If not, okay. I think I'll just reiterate some of my comments in regard to the proposal, and the report gives clear recommendations to protect the amenity of the area. And I think the officers' recommendation, they provide cogent reasons for their recommendation, and which I agree with. So I think that I'll be supporting it again. So if there's no further discussion on the item, I'll put the item to a vote for the alternate motion to approve with conditions and the amendments agreed to by the mover and second. All in favour? 3 against, 2. The item is approved. Thank you very much, presenters and all involved in that one. We now move to the next item on the agenda. Item 4, which is Form two DAP applications. There are none. Item 5, the SAT reconsideration for number 2 Aurea Boulevard, Golden Bay. Mr. Stanier, would you like to make your presentation, please?
Yes.
Thank you. Cheers. Thank you. Good morning, presiding member, panel members, attendees of this Metro Outer DAP meeting. I'm Alessandro Stagno, Director of Apex Planning and the applicant of the Neighbourhood Centre Development at number 2 Aurea Boulevard, Golden Bay, which is up for reconsideration by the panel this morning. Also in attendance via video link is Mr. John Hurley of EAQ Consulting, the project emissions expert who produced the technical emissions reporting for this development. Mr. Hurley will be available to answer questions at question time. Recognising that the panel has a significant amount of information before it in relation to this item, including a written submission that I put forward at the end of last week, I don't intend to waffle on. I'll keep my presentation short and to the point, but I'll do my best to summarise the fundamental reasons why an approval is warranted this morning. Since refusal of the application in July 2023, this proposal was the subject of detailed discussions in 2 mediation conferences as part of the SAT appeal process. We hope the information contained in the Metro Outer DAP agenda shows that our team exerted a significant amount of effort to collaborate with the City of Rockingham and the respondent to alleviate and resolve the previous issues that related to the refusal. Where service station emissions are concerned, the process benefited greatly from the input of an emissions expert engaged by the City of Rockingham, who was able to test the veracity of our emissions experts' work, clearly define the applicable assessment criteria and the national emissions compliance context, and provide critical points of technical feedback to inform a revised emissions assessment. Through these post-refusal discussions, our team was able to improve the proposal through an additional information package, which included a revised emissions assessment and improvements to the site plan to improve pedestrian accessibility, vehicle access, and service vehicle movement. The Metro Outer DAP agenda contains a comprehensive and thorough assessment of the revised proposal by the City of Rockingham's planning staff. The officer report carefully considers the issues at hand, and it arrives at a conclusion that this application is worthy of approval. I'll just provide the panel with a brief overview of the 3 refusal reasons and what was done to resolve them. The first refusal reason related to the potential for emissions from the service station to create unacceptable levels of benzene exposure to sensitive land uses, in particular, 2 childcare developments to the west of the site. Obviously, I'm a town planner. I'm not an expert in this field. This issue has been dealt with by experts who are suitably qualified in this field. What I can do is I can summarise the process and outline the reported outcomes from the work that they produced, which is also appended to the Metro Outer DAP agenda. To demonstrate acceptable outcomes and negligible risk, a site-specific scientific study known as an emissions impact assessment was prepared by EAQ Consulting, which utilised a modelling system that is recognised and widely accepted throughout Australia. The city's emissions expert reviewed the assessment and found it to be generally consistent with what would be expected for this type of development scenario, and importantly, also found it to be consistent with DWER's draft guideline for air emissions, which completed public consultation in 2020. Post-refusal discussions revealed that the modelling adopted unrealistically conservative inputs associated with benzene concentrations, the amount of fuel delivered from the site, the amount of fuel pumped from the Bowsers, and it assumed that 100% of the fuel on site would be unleaded petrol, which is not actually the case. Even with these unrealistically conservative inputs, the modelling demonstrated airborne benzene levels lower than the compliance limit. Why this is important is because the actual outcomes can be expected to be better than the modelled outcomes, which provides confidence for the assessing authorities and the decision makers. But most importantly, the revised emissions assessment incorporated that data that was collected from the site based on the monitoring of the existing 7-Eleven service station, which is adjacent to the development that's proposed. And this was done through parameters and methodology that were agreed upon with the city's emissions experts. The monitoring exercise strengthened the reliability of the reporting, and it further demonstrated that airborne benzene levels at nearby sensitive receivers is expected to be no more than 5% of the standard, but even at absolute worst case, no more than 11% of the standard. The conclusion drawn by the City of Rockingham's officers and their emissions experts is that the service station is unlikely to present an unacceptable risk to public health in the vicinity of the site, subject to the use of stage 1 and stage 2 vapor recovery systems, which have been documented in our materials. The second and third refusal reasons related to the Aurelia Boulevard access and various traffic flow considerations within the site. The markup site plan on the screen shows the changes that were made to the proposal and supported by expert traffic input that was formulated by our expert traffic engineer to resolve the previous issues. Most notably with the incorporation of a turning pocket to improve the Aurelia Boulevard crossover and its interaction with the road network, and the provision of pedestrian infrastructure within both crossovers and the improvement of operations within the service station forecourt. The City's officers are satisfied with the changes and are comfortable that the second and third refusal reasons are resolved. So for the reasons that I've just outlined and for the background that I've just explained, we respectfully request that the development be granted approval in accordance with the officer recommendation. The site has been vacant and contained disused infrastructure for a really long period of time, and it would benefit from activation as a neighbourhood centre development, such as that which is proposed. Happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Stanio. Panel members, any questions? Councillor Jones.
Yeah, thank you very much. I guess the biggest issue is the location of the service station. I guess that was was there an alternative site that you considered, or why does it need to be that on the site?
That's a good question. Thanks for asking that. I can explain the reason why it's located where it is. I'll just need to bring up the site plan. So if we were to relocate the service station further away, we'd need to swap it with the fast food outlet. The service station is a use which is more adaptable in the way that it can be sited, and it also requires fuel tanker movements. The drive-through fast food outlet is essentially a cookie cutter pad. We can do things to screen it, we can do things to improve its aesthetic value, but what we can't do is we can't make it into an active land use. And also you'll see that the width of the pad is a lot wider than the width of the service station. So if we were to flip those around, it would really mess around with the site's internal operations and would probably result in a scenario where it just wouldn't work. In addition to that, when we went through the further assessment exercises with our emissions expert, the fact that really acceptable and compliant outcomes were turned up, we found that was going to be a much better outcome for the site. The convenience store is actually provided with a dual entry and a significant amount of activation to Thunderlara Drive, and it generates a much better planning outcome consistent with the local development plan that applies to the area compared to what the fast food outlet could have if it were in that location.
Thank you.
Any other panel members have a query?
Yeah, I have a query. The residents in the area are quite keen to see the supermarket developed and leased. Can you tell me if you've actually entered into any negotiations with the supermarket for that site?
We have a fresh food operator that is looking to establish on the site, subject to the approval being granted.
Okay. And have any of the other areas been substantially leased?
The two fast food outlets in the service station and the liquor. So there are operators that are interested in each element of this development.
Each of the five?
Thank you. Any further questions? No. Thank you, Mr. Stanio.
Thank you.
Are there any questions of the council staff at this stage? No? Okay. Well, a recommendation responsible authority report for refusal. Do I have a mover and seconder so we can go into debate on the item?
I should move.
Move Councillor Buchan.
Second. Yeah.
Seconded Councillor Jones. Councillor Buchan, you wish to speak to the item, please.
Yeah, thank you. The Golden Bay Neighbourhood Centre is obviously a large part of the whole of the Golden Bay or New Golden Bay development, and certainly the feedback we're getting from residents is that they would like the supermarket element. However, there was substantial objections to fast food and liquor and servo, and certainly the location of the servo so close to two sensitive land uses has caused a lot of objections to be raised. So looking at some of the responses from certainly the Department of Education, they consider it an incompatible land use. We have a primary school 210 metres away. We have one of the largest high schools in the whole of the Peel region within a kilometre. And we have these two childcare centres, one of which is 21 metres away and one of which is 47 metres away. So I think there's science behind the separation guidelines that we have to rely on. And just because we can do something does not mean we should. So from my point of view, the policy on the industrial interface, it's a 24-hour servo. It has to have a 200-metre separation distance. That's quite substantially reduced in this application to 21 metres and 47 metres. I find that unacceptable. The traffic risks have been mitigated by introducing a one-way system through the pumps and reducing the refueler tanking size down to 17 metres. I think that's going to be very difficult to monitor and maintain. The location of the servo is one of the biggest issues for me on this site. So with that, the proximity and separation distances are a huge issue. I'd like you to be cognizant of the precautionary principle in that health and safety is very important to the people of Rockingham, and this may be low risk, but it's still a risk to babies and children in those childcare centres. And the traffic impacts on Oria Boulevard up to the signalised intersection, I don't think have been adequately mitigated by the one-way system. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Jones.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, for me, it's the location of the service station in relation to the childcare centres. Again, from a health point of view, I think there's still risk, and especially what we've heard from the community. I think this is still, I guess, an unknown, the impacts. That's why, again, I would use that precautionary principle as well. I do find it difficult to comprehend here why there could have been a bigger redesign to set back the service station more than just leaving its current location. So, yeah, I'm still not supportive of the application. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else wish to speak for the item or against the item? Mr. Syme.
Yeah, look, I do recall this one when it came up last time, and I think it was an on-balance issue then, and it still is an on-balance issue, but for me, I think the balance has been resolved. There's a couple of things which are running here, I suppose. This is a site which, if it didn't have this sort of mix, then what would it have? These are the sorts of mixes you'd expect on a site like this. And I think I do understand the thinking behind where the service station is, and there are some reasons, odour aside or emissions aside, as to why that's a good location for the sort of multi-use service station, fast food, a convenience outlet, which inevitably it is. And similarly, those fast food outlets are there in a sort of location which is comfortable for them. So I understand the site planning, and I think it's a reasonable one. The issue that then comes out is the one of emissions. And again, I think we do have to go with the science. And if the science in this case says not only has it been modelled, but it also has been monitored, then it's not something that we can ignore and say, well, this is something which is we know something more than this, or the precautionary principle is something which overweighs it. I don't think in this case, given the sorts of numbers that I've seen there, I think that there is such a thing as too much precaution, and I think this would be a case of that. So I'm on balance, I am satisfied that this proposal then is capable of approval, so I won't be supporting this motion.
Thank you. Karen?
Thank you, presiding member. I guess I have had the benefit through attending SAT of understanding the site and its practicalities in a lot of detail. But from a planning perspective, I think the proposal is consistent with the planning framework, largely consistent with the local development plan. The variations that are put forward are acceptable in that respect. The focus on the service station, there has been a lot of technical investigation on the emissions and peer review on a few occasions of the reporting that has been done. And I'm comfortable, and I think, you know, what I read in the RAR from the officers, that they are also comfortable with the measures taken, with the technology would really provide very little risk, if any, to proximity of the sensitive receptors. Similarly with the traffic, I think that has been thoroughly investigated, and discussions have been held with the city's officers who are responsible for ensuring those kind of safety aspects, and they are satisfied that the traffic is access, egress, circulation, etc., is being appropriately managed. The land uses proposed certainly seek to activate as much as possible the main street and the principles of the LDP, and provide an environment which is conducive to pedestrian movement and safety considerations, and landscape to soften the built form. So on balance, and I was on the opposite side when we last considered this, but on balance, I'm now comfortable with the application, and therefore will not support the motion to refuse.
Thank you. I'll also advise that I'm not supporting the recommendation to refuse. In assessing the application, I've cognizance that the site planning has gone through quite a lot of assessment and development. The mix of uses is in keeping with contemporary shopping or commercial developments and shopping centres. The mix of uses reflect a demand for those uses. Otherwise, I don't think the developers would be proposing them. They're all capable of approval. There's discretion to approve the uses and the mix of them. I think the fact that there have been some objections to the fast food outlets, I think we're seeing more and more of those objections appearing in development applications, but in the absence of any hard and fast policies that we can rely on to refuse them, then they're capable of being approved, and it's not our role to dictate, you know, the eating habits of our community. The main issues that were raised in the refusal, or the refusal earlier, is the service station. Once again, that's been well and truly examined. I think the monitoring was the important thing that I saw, that the emissions from the existing service stations are quite low, and it's anticipated to be the same for the proposed service station. In terms of traffic, the traffic impact assessment has been well worked through. There have been some modifications to the plan to reflect the concerns that were earlier raised, and they've, together with all the other issues raised, have been supported through the city's officers and the recommendation for approval. So I shall be voting against the item. Councillor Buchan, you have the right of reply.
Yeah, thank you. So we originally have refused this once before, and the 4 reasons given were about the location of the servo. Objection 1 and 4 were about the location of the servo and it being within the buffer distances as recommended by the EPA guidance statement. Those 2 items are still not resolved. The traffic concerns and traffic impacts, they are still not resolved to my satisfaction, given that all we're doing is asking people to go into a servo one way and out another way, which seems to me just a very small mitigation. The original refusal was about the siting of the service station, and it has not been moved around the site, even though there was potential to do so. And I appreciate that the new site plan has been assessed, but it has not been revised. It has not been revised in relation to the reasons for refusal the previous time it came before us. I think we need to go with the science behind the guidelines. The modelling and the monitoring that was conducted was done on 1 single servo, which is further away from the site of this servo. So now we've got 2 servos, which we're not able to monitor. And as far as I can see, there's never too much precaution when it comes to the health and safety of children and babies in my community, and I do not want to put them at risk. There's been a lot of technical reports, but it's an emerging science, and we don't know what's going to happen in the future. And once we know that this service station is built, we know it's there forever. So I'll be voting against.
Thank you. With that, I will put the item to a vote. All those, will the panel members indicate those in favour of the recommendation? 2 against, 3. The motion is refused. Not the item.
The motion's lost.
Motion is lost. Okay, so we then have an alternate motion that is available to us under the officer recommendation, and I call for someone to move that alternate recommendation. Moved Mr. Syme, seconded Karen Hyde. Mr. Syme, you to speak to the item.
Look, I think a lot's been said about this. As I said before, I think the issues which have been brought up in the previous refusal have been addressed, and I think they've been addressed satisfactorily. So I think we can approve it.
Thank you. Karen has seconded. Do you wish to speak to that?
Yes, I think what I've said before still stands, and I'm comfortable in the way that the conditions associated with this approval have been put together, and feel that that will manage and control the development adequately. I would like to see the development brought forward as quickly as possible, particularly obviously the supermarket, which the local residents, as the elected members have said, are very keen to see. So I look forward to fulfilling the potential of the centre. So.
Thank you. Anyone opposed to the motion wish to speak? No? Okay. I'll just reiterate my support for it again, and it moves fairly quickly. Okay, with that discussion completed, I'll now put the item. All those in favour of the alternate recommendation? 3 against, 2. The alternate recommendation is carried. Thank you very much. Next item on the agenda, Part C, other business. Item 1, Supreme and SAP appeals. They're listed. Item 2, if there's no general business, I'll close the meeting at 10:52 a.m. and thank everyone for their participation. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
in regard to the setup for this room? Have you done a few in here now? Or